Have you ever come back from a brilliant holiday, and the first question you've been asked is, what was it like? You probably had a surge of inspiration to explain exactly what the last 7 days were like, and yet your answer, we had a fantastic time, beautiful beaches, great food, simply didn't do it justice. Or a week later, you're showing your family the photographs, and this is always very difficult. You begin flicking through. They can see on the screen 20 of 750. 21, 22, 23. With all the will in the world, 24, 25, 26. They can't see what you saw, and they can't feel what you felt. I liken this to the modern way that we receive our news. Thousands of sources of information that only really confuse us about subjects that we otherwise might care a great deal about. But I believe there's an alternative to this, and that's drawing. Drawing or illustration is no new concept when it comes to recording the news. In fact, 160 years ago, weekly illustrated periodicals sold thousands of copies in Britain. And it's sad because since then, the dominance of photography and film has only really fed our obsession with it and almost entirely taken over from illustration. This year marks the centenary of World War I, a war that, despite the technological capabilities of the camera, was recorded in paintings and drawings. These are the images that we remember. These are the images that showed us what it was like. And these are the images that remain on our museum walls. But could we come full circle? Could illustration really become the favored solution that it once was? I'd like to show you some drawings I made 18 months ago in Syria. In August 2012, I was kicked out of my flat for the Olympics, and instead of spending a month on the floor of a friend's flat, I bought a flight to Turkey and a bus ticket to Syria. The conversation at the border was not quite the debate I'd run through in my mind. In fact, I showed him, the border guard, my passport, and he waved me straight through. You walk 2 or 3 kilometers on your right, a large refugee camp, 12,000 people inside there. On your left, an old duty-free shop. And strangely, a well-signposted minefield leading up to a gate. You go around the gate, very friendly that man there with a Kalashnikov. He points you in the direction of the border guard. When I met Fadi, he shook me by the hand and laid his on his chest in that wonderfully reassuring way. He smiled, and I explained to him in quite careful English that I wanted to draw the situation facing the civilians in the next closest town, Azaz. Of course, Fadi replied in fluent English, "Where do you want to go? What do you want to do? Do you need a car? Do you need a translator?" Today, I'd like to show you why I believe reportage illustration is as valid, as viable, and as powerful as photography and film in recording today's news. And here's why. Interpretation. The first thing you see when you walk into Syria is an abandoned tank. The second, a petrol station blown inside out. The third, under the shadow of a collapsed mosque, another tank lies half buried. Children rotate the turret of one. An older lad collects the bolts out of the bottom of another. It became all the more real when I found myself standing on a pile of bullet casings, knowing that someone must have been here, being shot at, firing back, but not knowing what had happened between then and now. This scene was what I found. As an illustrator, you're free to interpret the elements that inspire you. And imagine if you were drawing this, which bits you would leave out, which bits you'd include. How would you not just paint a pretty picture? This was my interpretation. And while I was drawing, I really noticed the detail of the tank, the weight of it in comparison to the children playing on top of it, their new climbing frame. And all of that in comparison to the space on the left blank. One is relevant to the story, one is not. The absence of one, though, highlights the importance of the other. It was my brief, albeit self-appointed at the time, not to copy the scene with photographic accuracy, but to describe my experience, the experience of others around me. This is the bakery in Azaz. And as this scene unfolded, my pen marks were influenced by my surroundings, the 40-degree heat making me draw quickly, the fact I was standing up, the queues in the bread line, the noise of the motorbikes. And in particular, this man at the front right who summed up the scene for me. And if you'd been there, perhaps you would have picked something else, and that's what's so personal about drawing. But for me, the frustration and boredom of having to queue every day for something so basic as bread was captured in this pose, head in hands, back against the wall. And my experience of Azaz at the time was of a very vulnerable people who were returning to their homes to see if they'd been destroyed, to see if there's any news of their friends, and then trying to get on with life as close to normality as possible. Ismail watering his goats in the main square, the local market opening up. Drawing offers the viewer a different angle. It encapsulates the passing of time in one image. Those 2 or 3 hours spent on the street observing, watching, witnessing are so important. It's not just the snap of the shutter and walking away. It was these two images in particular that confirmed my decision not to compete with the photographers in Aleppo, 50 kilometers south. These photographers shooting the front line for the front pages, but to offer a different opinion, a fourth dimension, if I can create that for today, one that is understood to take a period of time and distill it into one image. Earning people's trust, this is something we all do every day of our lives. Drawing is often described as a handshake, a way of communicating with people, being introduced to people without necessarily speaking a common language. I find it a welcome, an open process that people can see over your shoulder. They don't feel threatened. They want to write their name on your page. They say thank you. And what that means is you're often given access to places that you wouldn't otherwise be allowed to see. This is a police station, prisoners in a police station in Azaz, held by the Free Syrian Army, or the rebels, as the press call them. And in particular, this man, I remember, who, for the entire time I was drawing him, lay completely still, always in quite an intimidating way, staring at me. What hadn't occurred to me was that perhaps he knew exactly what I was doing. Perhaps he didn't really mind that I was drawing. And sure enough, after 15 minutes, he looked up, gestured as to whether I'd finished, and whether he was allowed to move. Of course he was allowed to move, but this was one of those moments that I can safely say probably wouldn't have happened had I been holding a camera. Even the terminology of photography is aggressive. Cut, shoot, manipulate, action. Drawing is not, it's trusted. And the audience or the subjects who are inevitably local are attracted to it as much as I am to them. It benefits from a mutual fascination. Occasionally, though, there have been things that I have found difficult to draw. This scene was one of those. 2 days earlier, Firas was caught in a government shelling, losing his mother, his brother, and his right leg. And it occurred to me standing there in the field hospital that perhaps me being there or that drawing was completely mundane in comparison to this family's suffering. And it was confusing because on the one hand I had a nurse coming in, ripping off the covers to show the stump in his naked body, keen that I should do the drawing. On the other hand, Hassan, his father, translated as saying, art can make no difference, and he might be right. And in the corner, thankfully translating for everybody, a man explaining that these scenes must be recorded in some way for the outside world to understand. But I believed at the time, and I still believe, that if these drawings are going to be done, or if these scenes are going to be recorded in any way, drawing is the most sensitive way of doing that. These last two images are the most personal to me. I drew them on the border of Turkey with Médecins Sans Frontières mental health project. The first is of this wonderful old geography teacher called Mama Nazik. Mama Nazik was hung by her hands for 20 days under the Hafez al-Assad regime, all for not signing a piece of paper saying she'd be a member of a political party. She had 3 sons, all fighting for the opposition. The first was shot through the hand, the second killed launching a rocket, and the third shot through the belly and paralyzed from the waist down, trying to save his brother. And for 50 minutes, she sat in front of me, describing her Syria, her life, her compassion for the younger generation, always looking me in the eye, quite often with tears in her eyes. A transcript that hardly bears reading, let alone listening to. I found drawing became a way of processing this wonderful woman's story. And at the end, she said to me, "You can say, I had 3 flowers in my garden. One was eaten by the beast, and the other 2 trampled by the beast's foot as he walked away." To give you an idea of this woman's generosity, her affection, humanity, she adopted Khalid in the refugee camp they were both living in Turkey. Khalid was 11 when his father was shot at home by the government militia with a heavy machine gun. As he described it, splitting his father in 2. He and his mother managed to escape to the Turkish border, but on the way, they were stopped by a military checkpoint. The mother, realizing what was going to happen, dropped Khalid from the car and told him to run. He did, but like all little boys, he stopped and turned around to watch. He saw his mother dragged from the car and her head chopped off. Later, he was able to return with some other civilians when the checkpoint had moved on, and they were able to bury the body, but they never found the head. Wrapped in his Syrian opposition colors, he sat in front of us recounting the tales of only 20 days earlier. I don't think I've ever met a braver person. Even more remarkably, he went on, he's only 11, remember, he went on to talk about how he'd like to be a policeman and a doctor when he grows up to heal the people of the war. Drawing these 2 people was such a special privilege for me. They are, like many of the others that I saw, Firaz, Ismail, Hassan, Syria's truly, truly brave. Perhaps if more people could share this attitude of an 11-year-old lad and an exceptional lady, the peace process could demand more respect for the civilians, still the unwilling hosts of this war. It has taken me until now to realize that drawing on its own showed me what Syria was like. I won't ever forget that. But for those of you who do draw, please use your ability to tell us your stories. And for those of you who don't, next time you find yourself staring at a photograph, please question whether drawing could have offered you something more. Thank you.